So there's going to be a pretty simple goal with going over all of the NFL draft selections and grading them for each and every team. I'm going to try to spend not as little time as possible, but keep it around 2 minutes for each team. There are 32 teams to go through. I'm going to do 4 of them at a time, going division by division. And yeah, I think it's a pretty simple concept. I'm going to start off with the pre-draft roster for each of these teams, laying out position by position where each team stands, and then go over the selections, and then give my grade for each of those teams. The first set of teams is going to be the NFC West, and it's going to go in alphabetical order. So the first team that we're going to start with is the Arizona Cardinals. So like I said, we're going to start with what every single team's roster looked like before the draft, so we can kind of get a thought process, maybe what their needs looked like, or maybe how each of these teams felt, or kind of, in my opinion, how I felt about the team going into the draft and how they addressed the needs as I saw them. So with the Arizona Cardinals, offensively, you're looking at a team who has invested a lot in the skill position group the last few years, through free agency or through the draft. Draft picks like Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison, offensive additions like James Conner, and there's a lot of other guys at the wide receiver position. Zay Jones comes to mind. They do sign Quez Watkins in the offseason this year. I think offensively their weakness was along the offensive line. And then defensively, I think they addressed a lot of their issues through free agency this year. They needed to add up front. They needed to add in the pass rushing game. They didn't do much in terms of adding at their linebacker group, which I think is their main weakness. But through and through, this is a team who is pretty complete defensively. They're just missing a few pieces that could put them over the top. And I think in their draft selections, they did a pretty good job of not only adding at that linebacker spot with pick 115 and Cody Simon. I think they added to the positions they already addressed in the defensive line. Getting Walter Nolan and getting Jordan Burch, these are two guys who, I mean, in Jordan Burch's case, I think talent-wise, he was a back end of the first round or mid-second round at the latest in talent. And Walter Nolan was a top 10, some people even thought he was a top 6, top 7 candidate in this year's draft. Other picks like Will Johnson, I absolutely love this selection at number 47, just because of the value of Will Johnson at 47. This was another guy who was probably talent-wise a top 10 talent, and I think a lot of scouts agreed with that. The one issue was the injury concerns with Will Johnson. You also get some decent players in the last few rounds of the draft with Denzel Burke, Hayden Conner, and Kyton Crawford. Grade-wise, I give the Cardinals a B for exactly what I said originally. Great value in rounds 1 through 3 with each of their selections. 3 solid defensive pieces who can be cornerstones of A, the defensive line, and B, the secondary. And you have championship pedigree with a lot of the players you draft. You draft 2 national champions in Cody Simon and Denzel Burke. You draft some guys in Jordan Burch and Hayden Conner who were in the college football playoffs this year, all the way, up until, in Oregon's case, they were in the second round. In Texas's case, they were in the national championship semifinal. And so the only down part of it are those injury concerns I noted. Will Johnson has injury concerns. Jordan Burch had some injuries last year. Denzel Burke had some injury issues himself. And I do think running back probably could have been addressed. Yes, I know they got Trey Benson last year, but I just don't think we really have seen who the next guy is at that running back position yet. I don't know if it's going to be Mario DiMercato. I don't know if it's going to be Trey Benson. But James Conner isn't going to be around forever. And I feel like this was probably a pretty good year to address that running back position. Overall, a pretty solid draft for the Cardinals, though. Moving on to the LA Rams, this was a team who addressed a lot of their needs through free agency and trades in the offseason. They needed to add offensively. At the end of the year, it really came down to being Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams because, Cooper Kupp was injured, and when he came back, he really wasn't his full self. Tutu Atwell wasn't really that number 2 receiver that we were hoping that he could develop into. And at tight end, they just didn't have much. Offensive line, they're solid. They add Coleman Shelton. But again, they're just solid. Defensively is where this team is going to win a lot of games. Linebacker is not their strength, but they have guys that can play. Cornerback, they have young guys, they have vets. Safety, they have young guys, they have vets. And the defensive line is one of the best in the NFL. Their draft selections this year, Terrence Ferguson was their first selection in the second round, tight end out of Oregon. They pick up Josiah Stewart and Ty Hamilton for the defensive line. Jarquez Hunter in the fourth round at running back, Chris Paul Jr. at linebacker from Ole Miss, and Kanata Mumpfield in the seventh round towards the end of the NFL draft. Now, I give the Rams a C+. I think they did address positions of need. I think tight end, even though we have a lot of money going to Colby Parkinson and Tyler Higbee in these next couple of years, that is a position that's needed addressed for a while. I think they got players that could start. Josiah Stewart could start for this team. Chris Paul Jr., who I think is a great pick in the fifth round, that's a great pick, and he could be a starter this year. They also did get a first rounder in 2026 after trading with the Atlanta Falcons in the first round. But I really think they overvalued a lot of these players. I mean, Terrence Ferguson, I don't think he was worthy of the number 46 overall pick. Jarquez Hunter, I don't understand the selection at all. When you have Kyron Williams, when you have Blake Corum, when you have Ronnie Rivers, and you have Cody Schrader, I just don't understand the pick. And then, I think just overall they overvalued some of the players that they took, which is fine. If you're overvaluing guys but you really love your selections, these guys could end up being very possible positive contribution guys. And I can't hold that against LA if in the future these guys play really well. All I can say is I just don't agree with their valuing of some of these players. Next up is San Francisco. The 49ers were a team going into this offseason where they knew there was going to be a lot of changes made. Obviously, the trade of Deebo Samuel. Obviously, there's a few guys we're looking at where it's like George Kittle had a contract that, he did end up getting it signed, but we didn't know really the situation there. Brandon Ayuk has been, it seems like, a conversation piece in the offseason for the last 3 years. And Christian McCaffrey coming off easily the most confusing and frustrating year he's had since he got to San Francisco. We didn't really know what San Francisco's plan was going to be. However, I think they executed a pretty good plan in this year's draft. Through the first 5 selections of this year's draft, they addressed heavily up front in the front 7 on the defense, as well as picking up a cornerback in Upton Stout out of Western Kentucky at pick 100. They also add some pretty decent depth pieces at skill position, like Jordan James and Jordan Watkins, as well as Curtis Rourke in the 7th round to be a possible third-string backup quarterback for this team. I think the 49ers get a B+. I think they made a massive defensive line improvement. And they added where they lost a lot of guys in free agency last year. Namely, at wide receiver, Jordan Watkins from Ole Miss. Running back, Jordan James from Oregon. They're replacing 2 guys who, I guess replace probably isn't the right word, but they're coming into a position group where there's guys missing that played a big piece not only last year, but in a lot of previous years. They got some good depth in late rounds, like I said. I do kind of wonder about picking Curtis Rourke out of Indiana, where there really wasn't a lot of hype around Curtis Rourke. I know a 7th round pick. It's not like he is going to garner that much spotlight in the pre-draft process, but Quinn Ewers was still available at this pick, which kind of was a shock to me to begin with. And so I kind of wonder about taking Curtis Rourke over Quinn Ewers, but maybe that's more of a conversation about Quinn Ewers than it is the 49ers. Last, but certainly not least, is the Seattle Seahawks. Now, pre-NFL draft, this was a team who's very top-loaded in terms of their depth and how they have spent their money recently. Sam Darnold got the huge contract he did. Cooper Kupp got the contract he did. The defense, Leonard Williams, DeMarcus Lawrence. There's a lot of money to a few guys, and you kind of see with especially their cornerback depth, especially their linebacker group, and even bleeding into their safety group, there's really not a lot of depth here. It's a depth chart where there's not a lot of depth. But they did pretty good in the draft, in my opinion. Now, I'll say the first round, if I was just basing their draft off the first round and I didn't know anything else that they did, I hated the Gray Zabel pick. I understand he's a good offensive lineman. He's going to slot in as probably a starting guard for this team. I hated the pick. It seemed like such a Seahawks pick to overvalue somebody who probably isn't as high of a player as they are putting him. But when you consider, I would have loved Nick Emmanwori at that number 18 pick. I thought that was such a slam dunk selection. It made the most sense in the world. But they still get him in the second round. And they get a good tight end in Elijah Arroyo at number 50. They get Jalen Milroe at 92, who as well might have been maybe a bit of a reach. But you're getting him at the number 92 pick. You know exactly what you're getting him for, to develop. He has the athleticism. You hope you can develop him into the quarterback that you want him to be. And so overall, I absolutely love the draft that Seattle did. Gray Zabel. If you switch Zabel with Emmanwori, you say Zabel's the number 35 pick and Emmanwori is the 18 pick, I'd give it an A++. But either way, this is a great draft. You got 4 players in your selections, and I'm not talking about Milroe, I'm talking about Zabel, Emmanwori, Arroyo, and Torrey Horton, who at 166 is an incredible selection. You got 4 players who can make a massive impact on this team. And from day one, in Zabel and Emmanwori's case, they could be day one starters that are leading this team into possibly the next era of great Seattle Seahawks teams. Overall, I think the NFC West did pretty good. We're going to see this is going to be one of the most competitive divisions again this year with how well these teams did in their draft. The Seattle Seahawks were a team that were close to contention for the NFC West towards the end of the year, but they couldn't really keep up with the LA Rams. And now I think LA did a bit of a poorer job than Seattle did in adding to their team. And I could easily see Seattle retake that throne as the NFC West champions this year.